What is the value of a single man, his unconventional mind, and an unshakable conviction when faced with the steel might of a German armored assault? In the vast, mechanized slaughter of the Second World War, protocol was king, and standard operating procedure was the gospel that kept men alive. To defy it was to invite ridicule, to mark oneself as a fool. But in the frozen hell of the Ardennes forest, in the dying days of December 1944, one man's stubborn refusal to conform, his seemingly backwards technique, would be forged in fire and prove to be the difference between annihilation and survival. This is not merely a story of tank versus tank. This is the story of a young gunner from Philadelphia, a man named Lafayette G. Poole, his crew, and their Sherman tank nicknamed In the Mood. It is the story of how, in 6 minutes of pure, unadulterated chaos, Poole's mocked loading method would silence every critic with the thunder of his 76mm gun, etching his name into the legend of the 3rd Armored Spearhead Division. The stage is set. The date is December 17, 1944. The location, a snow-dusted, pine-lined road near the village of Rockerth, Belgium. The German spearhead of the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, is driving hard for the Meuse River, and in its path stands a thin line of American armor and one extraordinary tank commander. To understand the sheer improbability of Lafayette Poole's feat, one must first understand the world he operated in. The M4 Sherman was the workhorse of the Allied armies. Reliable, numerous, and mechanically sound, it was nevertheless outclassed by the heavier German Panthers and Tigers in a street fight. Its standard 75mm gun often struggled to penetrate the frontal armor of these beasts at range, a grim reality known all too well by the men who crewed them. Crews developed a morbid humor about their Ronson-lighters, joking that they lit up first time, every time. Into this reality stepped Staff Sergeant Lafayette G. Poole. A larger-than-life Texan by way of Pennsylvania, Poole was a natural tanker, aggressive, confident, and fiercely protective of his crew. He commanded, In the Mood, an M4A1 76W, a slightly upgunned variant with a higher velocity 76mm main gun. His crew was a hand-picked family. Driver Wilbert Baby Richards, bow gunner Bert Schoolboy Close, loader Delbert Jailbird Boggs, and gunner Willis Groundhog Euler. They had trained together, fought together, and developed an almost telepathic rhythm inside their steel coffin. But Poole had a quirk, a method that set him apart from every other tank commander in the European theater. Standard doctrine for a Sherman commander was to fight buttoned up, inside the turret, using the periscopes. The loader would receive the type of ammunition, armor-piercing or high-explosive, from the commander, then turn, select the round from the rack surrounding him, ram it into the breech, and shout up. Poole defied this. He insisted on fighting with his head and shoulders exposed out of the commander's cupola, despite the lethal shrapnel and sniper fire. He claimed it gave him superior situational awareness, a feel for the battlefield no periscope could match. More radically, he changed the loading procedure. He would not call out the ammunition type. Instead, he would simply kick the gunner, Willis Euler, in the left shoulder for an armor-piercing round, or the right shoulder for high explosive. Euler would then shout the type to the loader, Boggs, who was already positioned facing the rear of the turret, towards the ammunition stowage. Boggs, already facing the rounds, would grab the designated shell, spin, and load. To every other tank crew, this was insanity. It was backwards. The loader was supposed to face the breech, not the ammo racks. They mocked Poole and his crew relentlessly. Circus act, they called them. They'll get themselves killed. But Poole was unwavering. This method, he believed, shaved crucial seconds off their rate of fire in the deadly calculus of tank combat, where the first shot often decided the engagement, a second was an eternity. His crew trusted him implicitly. Their lives were the wager on his belief. The strategic situation in mid-December 1944 was one of impending catastrophe for the Allies. Hitler's audacious Ardennes offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, had shattered the quiet front. Through the dense mist-shrouded forest, German panzer divisions poured, aiming to split the Allied armies and capture Antwerp. Among the hardest-hit sectors was the Lossheim Gap, defended by Green American infantry divisions that were overwhelmed and falling back in disarray. The veteran 3rd Armored Division, including Pool's company and the 32nd Armored Regiment, was thrown into the breach as a mobile fire brigade. Their mission to blunt the German advance and prevent a complete breakthrough. The weather was a weapon for the enemy. Low, thick clouds grounded the mighty Allied air forces, and a bitter cold seeped into bone and machinery alike. The terrain was a nightmare for armor. Narrow, icy roads hemmed in by dense stands of pine, steep, wooded ridges, and blind corners that could conceal a deadly ambush. Then, at approximately 14:30 hours, the world exploded. From a tree line just 400 yards ahead, a blinding flash erupted, followed instantly by the shriek of an armor-piercing round passing mere inches over their turret. It smashed into a pine tree behind them, sending a shower of splinters and snow onto their engine deck. Contact front. Pool roared, his voice cutting through the deafening roar of the near miss. A German Mark IV Panzer, its long 75mm gun still smoking, had revealed itself. Then, at approximately 14:30 hours, the world exploded. From a tree line just 400 yards ahead, a blinding flash erupted, followed instantly by the shriek of an armor-piercing round passing mere inches over their turret. It smashed into a pine tree behind them, sending a shower of splinters and snow onto their engine deck. Contact front. Pool roared, his voice cutting through the deafening roar of the near miss. A German Mark IV Panzer, its long 75mm gun still smoking, had revealed itself. The training, the drills, the mock procedure, all of it snapped into hyper-focused reality. Pool didn't call out the round. He kicked Willis Euler hard in the left shoulder. Armor piercing, Euler yelled. Delbert Boggs, already facing the rear stowage, snatched a 76mm AP round, spun on his heel in the cramped turret, and slammed it into the breech in one fluid motion. UP! He screamed, ducking clear. Euler, who had never lost the target in his gun sight, traversed the turret a hair, the hydraulic whine drowned by his own heartbeat. He fired. The Sherman rocked back on its suspension, the concussive crack deafening inside the hull. The shell flew true, striking the Mark IV on its glacis plate. A jet of orange flame erupted from the enemy tank's hatch, followed by secondary explosions as its ammunition cooked off. First blood two in the mood. But there was no time for celebration. For the men of In the Mood, the next several hours would blur into a continuous, nerve-shredding battle for survival. They held their position, a lone steel sentinel on a critical junction. German infantry, Volksgrenadiers, tried to flank them, only to be cut down by the coaxial machine gun and the relentless fire from Bert Close in the bow. The cold became a secondary enemy, frosting vision blocks and numbing fingers. By late afternoon, the light was beginning to fade, casting long, menacing shadows across the snowy forest. The lulls in the fighting were worse than the action, filled with the dread of what the next tree line concealed. Pool remained exposed, a target for every German sniper, but his panoramic view was their only early warning system. He could hear the distinct, deeper diesel rumble of German Panthers, a sound that struck fear into any Allied tanker. They were out there moving, hunting. The platoon's other tanks had been tasked to support infantry or had been pulled back to other threatened sectors. For a critical period, Pool's Sherman was effectively alone, a roadblock against an entire Panzer division's reconnaissance in force. The pressure was immense. Every rustle of the wind in the pines sounded like approaching tracks. Every shadow looked like a low, slinking turret. The crew subsisted on adrenaline and fear, the taste of copper perpetually in their mouths. And then, as the December dusk turned the sky a bruised purple, the main event arrived. It was just past 1600 hours, the winter twilight deepening into an early, gloomy night. The temperature plummeted. Suddenly, Pool stiffened in his cupola. His ears, finely tuned to the battlefield symphony, picked out a new sound over the idling of their own engine. The grinding clatter of heavy steel tracks on the frozen road from the east. Not just one set, but multiple. Then shapes materialized from the murk, dark silhouettes against the snow. Not the smaller profiles of Mark IVs, but the low-slung, deadly forms of Panther tanks, the G model, their long, overhanging 75 millimeters KWK-42 guns probing forward like venomous stingers. 1, 2, 3. Then a fourth, a full Zug of some of the finest medium tanks of the war, belonging to the 12th SS Panzer Division. They were advancing in a loose column, confident, perhaps unaware of the single Sherman lying in wait around a bend in the road. The distance closed with terrifying speed, 800 yards. 700 yards. They were now well within the lethal range of the Panther's superior gun, which could punch through the Sherman's frontal armor at this distance like a sledgehammer through glass. Inside, in the mood, fear gripped the men. This was the scenario of their worst nightmares. 4-to-1 odds, and the enemy held every technical advantage. Thicker sloped armor, a more powerful gun. A conventional engagement would last seconds and end with, in the mood, as a burning wreck. Poole's mind raced. To engage was suicidal. To retreat was to abandon their post and let the Panthers crash into the vulnerable infantry and artillery positions behind them. There was no time to radio for support. They were alone. This was the crisis point, the moment where everything teetered on the brink. The metallic taste of terror was suffocating. The loader, Boggs, looked up at Poole's boots, waiting for a signal. The gunner, Euler, had the lead Panther in his sight, his finger hovering over the trigger, knowing his shot might be their last. The driver, Richards, was poised to throw the tank into reverse or surge forward based on a single word. The weight of command bore down on Poole with physical force. But then, the Texan stubbornness, that same quality that made him defy loading doctrine, hardened into resolve. He would not run. He would not give them a clean shot. He would use the one advantage he had, his crew's unparalleled speed, born of that backwards method, and the element of surprise. Driver, advance. Hard right, NOW. Poole bellowed. Wilbert Richards threw the Sherman forward, not back, lurching out from their partial concealment and angling the hull sharply. It was a reckless, aggressive move that momentarily confused the German column. Instead of presenting his weaker frontal armor, Poole presented a sharper, more difficult angled target. At the same time, he was closing the distance, a desperate gambit to get inside the Panther's optimal engagement range and to throw off their gunner's aim. The lead Panther's turret began to traverse, seeking the impudent Sherman. Gunner. Sabo. Lead tank. Tracks. Poole shouted, but his boot had already connected with Euler's left shoulder. The kick was transmitted. Sabo. Euler yelled. Boggs, already facing the ammunition, grabbed the tungsten core projectile, spun, and loaded. UP. The sequence was seamless, a well-oiled machine operating under maximum stress. Euler fired. The hypervelocity shell streaked across the shrinking gap, now barely 250 yards, and slammed into the Panther's left drive sprocket. There was a spectacular eruption of sparks and shredded metal. The German tank lurched violently and ground to a halt, its track sheared, immobilizing the 50-ton beast instantly. It was a wound, not a kill, but it blocked the road and created chaos. The German column was now in disarray. The second Panther, its vision blocked by the stricken lead tank, tried to maneuver. Smoke, snow, and confusion reigned. Poole didn't let up. Gunner. Panther TWO. Side shot. Fire! Another kick. Another lightning-fast load. Euler traversed, acquiring the flank of the second Panther, where its armor was vulnerable. He fired. The 76mm AP round punched through the side hull, just behind the turret. A second later, a fireball mushroomed from the engine deck. Then the hatches blew off as the ammunition detonated. The explosion lit up the twilight in a horrifying tableau. 2 Panthers were down, 1 crippled, 1 destroyed, in less than 60 seconds. But the remaining two enemy tanks were now fully aware and enraged. Their commanders had identified the lone Sherman. The third Panther backed up, seeking a firing lane, while the fourth tried to push past the wreckage. The German armor-piercing round screamed past Poole's head, so close he felt the heat of its passage, and cratered the frozen ground behind him. The shockwave rattled the Sherman on its suspension. Shrapnel pinged off their hull like deadly hail. They were now the absolute focus of two vengeful predators. This was the crucible. The air inside, in the mood, was thick with sweat, cordite fumes, and terror. They were maneuvering wildly on the icy road, Richards throwing the tank into reverse, then forward, trying to be an impossible target. Poole, still exposed, was a conductor of chaos, his voice a steady drumbeat over the din. Left sponsor, reverse. Gunner, target Panther 3, turret ring. The third Panther had found a clear shot. Its long gun flashed. The world dissolved into noise and violence as the German shell struck the Sherman's frontal slope. The impact was like being hit by a planet. Inside, the concussion was brain-rattling. Bolts, loose equipment, and spent shell casings flew through the crew compartment. A shower of sparks erupted from the electrical systems. Miraculously, the shell did not penetrate. It had struck at a sharp angle and ricocheted into the trees. But the shock had damaged their turret traverse mechanism. The hydraulic whine died, replaced by a sickening silence. They could now only aim their main gun by physically turning the entire tank. They were crippled, their greatest technical advantage, the fast traversing turret, gone. The German crews knew it. The Panthers moved in for the kill. This was the moment of absolute desperation. All seemed lost. But here, the human element, the crew's bond, and their unorthodox training became their salvation. Poole didn't hesitate. Driver, YOURETHE traverse. Line USUP. Wilbur Richards, a master driver, has now become an extension of the gun. He would have to point the entire 33-ton hull at the enemy to aim. It was a crude, almost medieval way to fight a tank. Box. Manual traverse. Help Euler. Poole commanded. The loader abandoned his station to crank the turret by hand for fine adjustments, while Euler worked the hand controls. They were fighting their tank as much as the enemy. The third Panther, sensing weakness, advanced. Its gun lowered. Poole, judging the distance and the slowing German tank, made a split-second, heroic decision. He would not aim for the harder-to-hit turret ring. He would go for a mobility kill again. Gunner. Drive sprocket. Fire O&M Y mark. He waited, the Panther filling his vision. Steady, steady fire. The 76 millimeters roared. The Sabo round was true, smashing the Panther's front drive wheel. The track snapped with a sound like a giant cable breaking. The Panther slewed sideways, blocking the road completely. It was now a stationary pillbox, but its gun was still deadly. The fourth and final Panther, perhaps realizing the ferocity of the resistance, had pulled off the road into the tree line, attempting a flanking move through the woods. It was a terrifying development. In the gathering dark in the trees, they could lose it until its muzzle flash was the last thing they ever saw. Poole ordered Richards to pivot the tank, grinding their tracks on the icy cobblestones, bringing their hull to face the new threat. They could see muzzle flashes from the Panther's machine gun as it hosed down their position, tracers ricocheting and starbursts off their armor. The German commander was being cautious, using the trees for cover. But in doing so, he had limited his own field of fire. Poole saw a narrow gap between two thick pines. It was a 1 in a million shot. Gunner. SETHEGPTO any o'clock? He's behind it. Put a round through there. Heat. A kick to the right shoulder. High explosive. Euler corrected, and Boggs, moving like a phantom in the semi-darkness of the turret, loaded the round. Euler aimed at the gap, not at a tank, but at a space between trees. He fired. The heat round flew straight and true through the narrow aperture and detonated on the Panther's forward hull. It may not have been a catastrophic kill, but the blast certainly damaged optics, wounded crew, and shattered the German's nerve. The Panther stopped firing. Its engine revved, and it began to reverse deeper into the forest, retreating. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of flames from the two destroyed Panthers and the hiss of escaping steam from their own overstressed engine. The 6-minute duel was over. In that fleeting, eternal span, through a combination of audacious tactics, preternatural crew coordination, and Poole's despised loading method, they had immobilized or destroyed 4 superior German armored vehicles. The backwards technique had proven its worth in the most demanding trial imaginable. Those mocked seconds saved per load had compounded into a volume of fire that bewildered and overwhelmed their opponents. They had held the road. The immediate aftermath was one of shock and exhaustion. The mood was badly battered. The turret traverse was destroyed, the hull was scarred with multiple hits and deep gouges from near misses, and the crew was physically and emotionally spent. But they were alive. Their stand had disrupted the German probe, buying critical time for American defenses to solidify around Rockereath and Krinkhild, the soon-to-be infamous Twin Villages. That would become a graveyard for German armor. After ensuring the immediate threat had receded, Poole ordered a withdrawal to friendly lines for repairs. The crew of In the Mood would fight on for several more days in the Ardennes, their legend growing within the regiment. Tragically, Lafayette Poole's incredible war would end just a few days later, on September 19, 1944, near the German border, when In the Mood was destroyed by a hidden Panther. Poole lost a leg in the engagement and was evacuated, ultimately receiving the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions that day. But the legend of the 6-minute duel on December 17th lived on. The after-action reports, corroborated by other units, and the tangible evidence of the wrecked Panthers cemented the feat. The mockery of his methods ceased forever, replaced by awed respect and tactical analysis. Poole's emphasis on rate of fire, situational awareness, and crew integration became studied, if not always replicated, examples of tank command excellence. Casualty figures for the specific engagement are hard to pinpoint, but the result was clear. 4 Panthers of the elite 12th SS were rendered combat ineffective against the loss of 0 American tanks in that immediate action. Strategically, actions like Poole's were the granular, human-scale friction that slowed the German spearhead to a crawl. Every minute bought, every roadblock held, compounded into the strategic failure of the Ardennes offensive. Lafayette G. Poole passed away in 1991, but his legacy endures. He is credited with 12 confirmed tank kills and over 250 enemy vehicles and pieces of equipment destroyed, making him one of the top American tank aces of the war. More importantly, his story is a testament to the power of individual initiative, the sanctity of crew teamwork, and the truth that in war, sometimes the greatest advantage is not a better weapon, but a better idea, executed with courage against impossible odds. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII-Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.